Welcome to the Spawn Chunks, episode number 333 for Monday, January 20th, 2025. This is a podcast all about Minecraft, available across all major podcasting platforms, including in video on YouTube. If you're enjoying the show, consider subscribing wherever you're listening to this. My name is Johnny, but the internet knows me as Pixel Riffs, and joining me, full of TV recommendations, it's Joel Duggan. Hi, Joel.
I am always full of TV recommendations. Because of the Citadel Cafe, my other show about sci-fi and fantasy entertainment, I am always on the hunt for something cool to watch and share on that show. And both Johnny and I had recommendations in the Render Distance, our extended version of the program, which you can get by heading over to patreon.com/thespawnchunks. Our supporters get an extra 30 to 40 minutes of podcast every single week. We talk about TV show recommendations, the stuff we're liking, the stuff we're not liking. We talk about things like streaming and Twitch and some of the behind the scenes and tech setups that we have in our studios. So if you're interested in that and you're interested in supporting the show, check out patreon.com/thespawnchunks. If you want to get even more, you can check out the monthly Minecraft Hangout that's coming up this, not this Saturday, but the following Saturday, the end of the month, where we talk with our patrons about what they've been building in Minecraft. And of course, in February, we have our quarterly Hangout, which will also cover the full year of 2024 in review in terms of how the podcast is doing. So lots to do behind the scenes at the Spawn Chunks.
So speaking of streaming, you've obviously been streaming a little bit of Minecraft this week. What's new on the Citadel?
So I have been continuing my work on the abandoned farmstead, which now has a completed overgrown wheat field. And I started working on the retaining wall. Previously, it was just a combination of tuff and cobblestone kind of placed like retaining wall goes here, details will come later. I didn't want to put in too much detail on it right away because, of course, the overgrown wheat field covers up a lot of the wall. So why put in all this detail only to cover it up later? So I focused on the overgrown wheat field, which was my first attempt at doing anything like this. I've planted crops before, but they were all meant to be active and very lush looking, you know, fields of wheat, golden on the hillside and all that kind of stuff. But this is meant to be overgrown with bushes and dead bushes and mangrove leaves, tumbling over the side of the wall and stuff like that. So the crops are all in, or the overgrown field is all in. Weirdly, you still have to lay it out as if you're going to make a proper field and then kind of go through and bust it up later, if that makes any sense. Kind of like texturing a wall. You tend to build the wall first and then texture it after. And so that's all done. I also did a lot of texture work on the paths, tried to make it look, again, unmaintained, trying to have some grass kind of overflowing into the path when I could. And I then started working on the retaining wall. And I really have to say thank you to you and the other person, I think, in your Twitch chat that reminded us that you can put grass on pale moss. Because One great way to make a retaining wall look like it's crumbling and overgrown is to use pale moss on the top of it and put grass on top of that. And it really helps in some situations, because sometimes the grass, the way that it places within the block is not always in the middle, or it's too far to one side and it doesn't look connected to other things. But if it's farther back and connected to the blocks next to it, it does look very natural, where the grass looks like it's kind of growing out, or the surface soil has maybe been pushed out over the wall over the years. And so I've used that in a number of places to help with like the bushes that have been overgrown and are now hanging down over the wall. I used a lot of tuff and mossy cobble. I did not go in with cracked stone and cobble and mossy bricks as I thought I was going to. I wanted to have it look older, and I wanted to play with some of the new textures that I haven't played around with. Every now and again, for a darker block, I used tuff bricks, but most of it was just the tuff family, so stairs and slabs and regular blocks, and then the mossy cobble family, again, stairs, slabs, and regular blocks. And depending on the block, I could get away with putting a pressure plate on top of it for just that little bit of extra texture so it all wasn't flat. But it worked out pretty well. I've not finished it. I've only done half of it. So in the screenshots that we'll share on video, the left side is complete as far as the wall goes. The right side is not. I haven't touched it yet. So in a way, you can kind of see like the planning phase of like, this is what it looked like when I'm just kind of like marking off where the wall goes. And then as I add a little bit of height and texture to it on the left, you can kind of see where my vision is going. And I think it's come together pretty well. It's in an odd location, but I kind of was left with not much choice because I've filled in the other farm places. And so the only thing left to do now is the riverbank. And I think I'd have to do some main path texture and a little bit of landscaping between the buildings as it comes up to the wall at the main entrance that separates it from the bee farm, the apiary farm, that is going to have the same treatment as the other retaining wall. So it shouldn't be too bad. Like it should really be just kind of more of the same. It's just a matter of putting in the time and getting it done. So we're getting close to finishing this, which is good because it's been like 3 weeks, I think, on this project, which is fine. I don't mind it, but it's after 3 or 4 weeks, like I tend to want to check something off and move on. But I think it's coming together.
I like the fact that you've got this abandoned farm right next to the back half of your pumpkin farm, where you'd explained on a previous show you had like a compost pile back there and some older pumpkin patches with the muddy mangrove roots that kind of look like a rotten fruit of some kind, right? And like I like the fact that you can fit that in there, and it almost feels like there's this gradient of decay or like stuff being left alone for a little while as it goes towards that like abandoned farmstead area. It kind of suits the vibe if you're looking out across the compost patch and there's just this abandoned building beyond. But I think this is coming together very well. I like the fact that you've got, even where you put in the pale moss and put some grass on top of it, you've also got like vines climbing up the side of it as well. Helps blend it with the mossy cobble and stuff. I think this looks like a masterclass in that kind of overgrown texturing of this sort of abandoned field. I think that's looking really effective.
Well, thanks, man. I really appreciate that. The layering thing is the real key. And the frustrating part of all of it, to prepare everyone that wants to try this, is you will have a full inventory constantly.
Yeah.
Just constantly. I had between 2 and 4 different kinds of leaf blocks, vines, grass, ferns, bone meal, 4 different kinds of dirt texture, as well as, with the wall, then I had like all the different stairs and slabs, all the different, for 2 different blocks. And then you have to have the hanging roots, the muddy blocks, like all this stuff. Not hanging roots, sorry, the muddy mangrove roots and the mangrove roots. And they are really useful. The trickiest part was the closer I got to the river. It is a custom river that's been moved, so not everything is river biome. Some of it still remains to be sunflower plains. But when you get into the river biome, your greens change. And so you have to start using leaf blocks that will change with the color. I don't think mangrove does, and I don't think I know azalea does not. So azalea and moss start to look really weird when you get close to a river, and you have to switch to like oak leaves or something that does change with the biome color. And so you have to be conscious of that, which is, again, yet another block you have to have in your inventory as you work farther down towards the thing. So I ended up moving a shulker box and a bed closer to the field to just like be able to dump and switch stuff on the fly, because I was just so frustrated with not having enough. But I really appreciate the compliment, man, because it's the first time I've tried the overgrown field, not the first time I've done a broken down wall, but the combination of the layers, it really does help. Like, that's why I'm so excited for these new blocks that we've been getting, like, leaf litter, and I mean, even pink petals and wildflowers, resin, which I haven't had a chance to mess with yet. But when you have something like that you can layer, it just opens up more possibilities. And for us right now, and for me on this particular project, we already had vines, but what they added in recent years was the ability to turn off vine growth as a game option. And so I can use the vines specifically, and they're not going to creep and crawl and grow out over the next 4 blocks next to them. Like, I can just use them on the pale moss and they're going to stay there. And that is really useful when you're doing something artistic like this and trying to, create that kind of texture layer effect.
Yeah. I mean, I've been finding fun uses for resin in my own world, which I think is nice to play around with. It's not quite as versatile as something like grass, and I feel like we're using grass a lot when we kind of working with the natural world around us, and having variants of that is really fun. But like you, I think leaf litter and wildflowers are going to be huge for that sort of outdoor texturing, while resin feels like it's got more of a specific use case. Fortunately, that use case for me includes honey farms, because I've been reworking my honey farm. I mentioned this last week, where I was automating the honey block production of it. So I've now moved the honeycomb farm closer to that and incorporated both into this work-in-progress Beekeeper's cottage. On the inside of that, I've been using resin just as though honey has sort of dripped on the floor from when it's been pulled out of a hive, or it's, been worked by the beekeeper, even though that's not necessarily the context in which you find it in going there to pick up honey blocks and honeycomb. Like, it's all just safely tucked in barrels. But I sort of like the idea of a few drops of honey landing on the floor and congealing or whatever, and it looking a little bit stickier, or adding some sticky ambience to the place if you're walking around in it, right? So the wall of this, I was planning this to be like a kind of homey cottage with tuff and moss forming part of the wall. I ended up building it up in more of the style of the houses that I built in my starter area in general. So I have a blacksmith, a starter house, the storage building, couple of other things around. There's a melon and pumpkin farm that's decorated in kind of a similar way, where there's a timber frame around everything and arched sections of wall showing through, while the upstairs floor is supported and is usually more made out of wood. I wanted bee nests in there as an accent block, so I used those in part of the construction of the wall, and I'm now onto the phase where I more or less know the shape of the house. I can make it slightly more interesting than just a plain box if I wanted to, but I'm trying to figure out what I'm making the roof of. And so I have 3 different choices that I've got in a creative world kind of mocked up right now, which is really green, kind of similar to where I've done my starter house roof with moss, so that I could populate it with little kind of, tall grass and plants and that kind of thing. The only side effect of that being potentially, unless improvements to bee AI have fixed this, the bees get distracted by there being flowers nearby. So potentially, even if there's like a flowering azalea shrub up there, they might try and pathfind to that to make honey instead of staying in the farm and staying with what's in front of them. Where they are contained, they can't get out of there, but it might potentially stop them from pollinating, producing honey, and slow down the efficiency of the farm overall. The next alternative is a red through white gradient, which starts with red terracotta, goes through mangrove and some of the redder wood types through jungle wood into oak and birch, and then finally with pale oak forming the top of the roof line. And that's really dependent on how tall the roof needs to be for the proportions of the building, so we'll see how I can space that out. The final one I feel like is a little bit too obvious, which is to use more yellow to mimic the colors that you get from a bee's nest. And since I've already used a strip of bee nests sort of at the bordering the base of the windows of this build, I'm not that keen on going back to yellow, but I thought, it's going to be the obvious choice for a beekeeper's house, so I tried mocking that up a little bit with like yellow terracotta with honeycomb blocks to add a bit more like roof tile texture in there. I'm not certain I like it, so I'm having a hard time convincing myself about that one. The other 2 I'm slightly more sold on, and I can put like dormer windows in to break up the texture a little bit, but I'm still trying to figure out the roof style. Either way, the scale of the building compared to the other stuff around it has turned it from a beekeeper's cottage into more like a beekeeper's mansion. It's bigger than the blacksmith. So I'm kind of, aside from the debate about what materials to use for the roof, I'm enjoying having a building task again, something that feels small and achievable, but still big in terms of the scale of the area. And I think it ended up in a really nice place. It's sort of on a ridge facing like towards my mountain. You can kind of see it on the left as you walk out of the storage building on my starter house. And I think it's in a really nice overlooking spot for the area. So I'm excited to get that built and have it be part of the landscape more permanently, still just trying to work out the particulars.
I really like the gradient from red to white. And as you were speaking, I was counting the blocks, and like I understand why you're saying mansion, because the roof itself is 9 blocks, I think, to get to that top peak, because you start off with 2 on the bottom. And like that, I mean, that's almost as tall as the bottom floor. And I need to do and want to do more gradients in Minecraft. But the thing that I've trapped myself into is very much a player scale situation in Westhill, where the roofs are only 4 to 5 blocks. And so doing a gradient in 4 to 5 blocks feels like stripes. You really have to get into the like 7 to 12 range for the gradients to feel effective. I think I like that red to white one the best. I know what you mean about being obvious with the yellow. I kind of wonder whether you can go red to yellow and still keep some of the bee kind of colors. Like that yellow terracotta really does work well with the bees' nests that are in the second floor. I'm wondering if the yellow terracotta could somehow be made into or worked into your gradient somehow, even if it's not a full strip. Like maybe it's just part of like a speckled texture as you kind of work your way up or something like that. But I like the idea of it being unique as opposed to more of the moss from your starter house, because again, the bees, like that would get annoying after all the work that you put into a roof. To know that the bees are like headbutting the ceiling in your bee farm trying to get to something they can't get to would be really, really frustrating. And I will echo our live chat. The other thing that I noticed right away was the fantastic use of the white pale oak trapdoors for shutters on the second floor placed in your world. Really effective. Like at first, it's almost like I didn't notice them. It's like, oh yeah, shutters. It's like, wait a minute. That's a new kind of shutter. Like
Mm-hmm.
that's new blocks right there. Really, really cool.
Thanks. The shutters are something I've done on the other houses as well, but using different materials. So I think one of them
Hmm.
has acacia, where it's got the 3 kind of horizontal slats in it. I
Yeah.
forget what I use for the others, but I think I have a mixture of them. Maybe there's some oak trapdoors here and there in the starter house. And yeah, I just wanted to do the same thing, but with a new material. And I think the oak... like I've been saying about pale oak all along, the door and the trapdoor have this modern farmhouse aesthetic to them, which I think is really attractive for interior design of a certain kind. If you want that kind of like rustic but still taken care of, it's kind of very solid white color. It looks like it's been painted. And so I like the idea of having that as a highlight for the bee house. And honestly, it's not been standing out as much as I thought it would. Like, I genuinely thought the white felt so pale in contrast to how warm the wood colors are I've used surrounding it, but I think it looks really good. So yeah, having a mix of stuff in there, wanting it to feel connected to the natural world with the moss and the bee nests, but having some warm wood around it. I think the white shutters are kind of the icing on the cake a little bit. And so the white sort of matching the white of the roof ridge is possibly where I'm considering tying that into the other parts of the build. So yeah, like you, I think I'm more keen on the red to white gradient than I am anything else. I feel like I've used a lot of different roof gradients in this area already, so it's not going to feel too out of place. I was just trying to mock it up and get a second opinion before I went any further with it. The next job's around my starter area, because this is really just me trying to find homes for all of the stuff that I've done a brief survival guide video about and then kind of abandoned for a while. I need a better pasture or paddock for my sniffers. There are 4 of them just in a fenced off area that's like maybe a 13 by 13 square at the front of my storage building, so those need to get moved somewhere more permanent. And I need a reason to move the set of frogs from the single fence post they're currently leashed to in the center of all of this to probably a frog light farm in the nether. So that's what I'm looking at to round out the month. So you'll probably hear about that in the next couple of episodes of the show.
Before we get into the news, I noticed that it's on a ravine. Is it on the edge of a cliff or a ravine? Like, what's your landscaping plan for around the bee building?
So I really like the fact that there's this kind of natural valley there. Like, there's a little bit of like awkward terrain underneath that I would probably smooth out, but there's a valley kind of at the foot of the mountain where the terrain from where my starter house is built slopes downwards, and then the mountain rises quite sharply upwards from that. And I was considering putting in like a river valley or something there, like just trying to imagine there's water runoff from the snowy parts of the mountain that maybe find their way down to where the river hits the sea, kind of closer to my base. And so I was considering landscaping a bit of that and having the beekeeper's cottage sort of be on top of that. I'm not certain if I want to keep it more meadow-like, so it looks like if there are bees active around there, they can at least have flowers that they go to and whatnot. It's kind of difficult to say what I'm going to do with it, but yeah, it does kind of dip there where I've currently got a like a cow pen and some starter crop farms that I never did anything with. They're just like rows of carrots and potatoes in case I needed them for villager breeding and that kind of stuff. So yeah, I still have those lingering, but if I want to do any more permanent landscaping with it, I was thinking a river valley there was going to be the first thing I went to.
Sweet. Yeah, no, it really helps emphasize the build. Like, it looks like there should be a staircase or a bridge or something to kind of lead into the entrance.
Yeah. I was thinking like there's a sort of deck, not quite a deck, like a patio, I suppose, at the front of the door for it. So it's got a bit of stone reinforced, masonry around the front of it that I can expand. I can kind of reshape the landscape. I can do a little bit with. I wanted it to have like a back patio as well, maybe like a little garden or something back there. So yeah, maybe we end up doing some more I guess like urban landscaping around that, but I like the vibe of this place so far. I like the fact that it feels like it's in tune with the natural world, so there's a balance to be struck there, I think. We're going to strike a balance with this show, though. We've talked enough. Let's move on to the news. We have another snapshot this week for Java Edition. Minecraft Java Edition Snapshot 25W03A was published this week and comes with a huge update to game tests. The game test system is now accessible through data packs, says the changelog, with the new test command. You can now run block-based tests with the new test block or set up even more versatile tests from codes in mods. The changes in 25W03A in terms of general gameplay are that leaf litter can now be used in the composter, saddles equipped onto pigs or striders will now maintain properties such as their custom name when dropped. We also have some technical changes. The data pack version is now 63 and the resource pack version is now 48. The new entry point net.minecraft.gametest.main is present in the server jar, and this allows you to automatically start a server, run all available game tests, and then exit again. The technical changes in this week's snapshot are, to be frank, very technical. For a full rundown of game tests and related features, more details are going to be on the changelog. That's over on minecraft.net. That's linked in our show notes at thespawnchunks.com if you want a quick link to that. In terms of data packs, the game data pack version is now at 63. The game test system is now accessible through data packs and for mods. Entity variants are now set and queried with components. They've added the saddle equipment slot driven by the equipable component. Only mobs that normally support saddles will support riding and rendering of the saddle, and items in the saddle slots can apply attribute modifiers as with other equipment. In terms of game tests, a brief synopsis of this: the game test system is a new integrated system for testing aspects of the game. Each test is an asset defining some parameters for how the test gets executed, combined with a saved structure file containing a base setup. Generally, the test framework expects to run tests in a separate superflat world. The resource pack version is now 48. This adds new equipment asset layer types for pigs and striders and has moved saddle textures there. They've changed the size of the pig saddle texture, and equipment assets may now define new layer types for layering over on top of other mobs. Bug fixes of note in 25W03A. Invisible saddles when using invisibility potions on a horse, donkey, or mule. That has now been fixed, so you'll know how to ride something that's invisible, I guess. A few other fixes to saddles, including not applying attribute modifiers when worn by entities, saddle equipping sounds not being played when they're equipped on horses, donkeys, mules, or camels shortly after the entity was summoned, the saddles of some entities staying visible through their death animation. Shulker boxes and other blocks in the end exit portal when it changes state were not dropped as items. That's now been fixed, along with players no longer being able to begin sprinting when pressing a sideways movement key first. Shulker boxes keep and drop their contents upon being broken via certain methods which cause item duplication. That's obviously a critical bug for them to fix. And a few changes to new blocks, including leaf litter. Mushroom blocks could not previously replace them, and leaf litter was replacing leaves in world generation. Using bone meal in meadows previously didn't generate wildflowers, and it now can. Shulker boxes dropping their contents when broken was a fix that's now been applied, along with update order for sloped rails being incorrect, and pink petals and wildflowers not being able to be grown by bone meal. There are obviously a lot more bug fixes. This snapshot was a more technical one, so for details of those and the data packs and resource pack changes, check out the 25W03A snapshot changelog on minecraft.net, which is also linked in our show notes at thespawnchunks.com.
The things that grabbed me this week were really in the bugs. Things that we talked about when leaf litter first came out in terms of how it behaves, and as well as wildflowers. I remember you had mentioned like it didn't behave the same way that pink petals did, and it turns out that that was a bug.
Yeah.
When you bone meal the wildflowers on the ground, they are going to then fill in the space. And then as you continue to bone meal, that's when you'll start to get like duplicates of the wildflowers, which makes sense. I think that's a what's the word I'm looking for? Consistent way for the wildflowers to move forward. And I think also they said that leaf litter can now be compostable. Yes. So that was another thing that we mentioned last week. We're just like picking up on like, why is this different? And it's always nice when you're just like, I don't understand why this is different, when you realize, well, it was a bug. It was supposed to be the same. It was supposed to behave exactly how you inferred it would, but it just wasn't working correctly. And so that's good to know. I feel like a lot of the bugs are related to this snapshot. Like there's less bugs that I'm seeing that are like fixing older bugs or addressing issues that have been in the game for a while. It's more just like, hey, we're changing the game with this thing, and in the process of changing the game with this thing, we've introduced a bunch of new bugs, like shulker boxes not dropping the way that they should, or saddles and entities adding some complications with the new saddle textures and equipable components and stuff. Like it seems like they've added some things, it broke some stuff, they fixed those bugs, and now they're just kind of moving on to whatever is coming next. So it feels like they're trying to hone in on a lot of these changes for pigs and saddles and stuff. And I have to say, I do like the idea of riding a saddle around in Minecraft with nothing else underneath it. Like I hover saddle, like a la Back to the Future, like a hoverboard, would be hilarious.
Yeah.
Just riding around on an invisible horse or whatever would be very, very fun.
Yeah, totally. Like, yeah, the saddles were the main thing that felt like they had old bugs attached to them, but you're right about there being a lot of bugs arising from the previous snapshot. One I ran into when I was playtesting it, actually, was that no hostile mobs were spawning under normal, like, low-light conditions. You could find them around structures, like Drowned would still spawn next to ocean ruins when I was flying around, but you didn't get anything that wasn't a structure-based spawn. So that was something that we didn't mention in the changelog, but seemed like one of those bugs that is not necessarily going to be them developing a new feature. It's just like a switch has gotten flipped somewhere, and hostile mob spawning isn't working the way it should. So that should now be pretty straightforward. I am glad to see leaf litter is compostable. I'm still hoping for them to make a change where they can put it on any block, because as we discussed last week, it feels intuitive that you could, because it doesn't need to be supported by the organic life below it. It's still usable without that, but it would be way more logical and way more usable if they allowed you to place it on stone, for example, right? I want to be able to border my paths with leaf litter, and also disguise the join between paths and the grass blocks or whatever other materials are around them. I think lately I've been looking into ways of smoothing the join between two blocks that really don't very obviously they have a really obvious divide between the two of them in terms of color, in terms of texture, and on builds you can do that by just putting like slabs as a joining material or something like that. If a block changes halfway up a wall from stone to terracotta, then you can just put like a nice like joining ridge of something, like the cladding for the outside of the building, siding, whatever, or you can find functional ways of messing around with that. Whereas if you're dealing with landscaping, that's a different consideration, and being able to put leaf litter on both sides of a join between grass and a stone path would really help to blend the two together and help it feel a lot more natural. So that's my hope for leaf litter still. Obviously, the other thing in this is the saddles retaining their properties. I think this, from what I've seen, has renewed calls for us to be able to remove saddles from pigs and striders, which are currently the two mobs that you have to kill in order to get the saddle back. And people have immense sympathy for both of those mobs, because the pigs are cute, the striders are cute. And since we can remove saddles from other rideable entities like horses, donkeys, and so forth, people are kind of surprised that you can't do that with pigs and striders. It mainly comes down to the fact that the horses or whatever have an interface, whereas pigs and striders don't. And I think implementing an interface for them would sort of maybe create a false impression on the player that they could do more with that interface. Like your pig could have storage the way that a mule or a llama can. But I think if we could remove them, let's say the same way you remove wolf armor, where you could shear it and then that takes it off without any damage to the mob, I think that would be a preferable option. It might just have to be updated to be that way consistently with horses as well. But I think that would end up being a good way, if they're in the process of fixing some stuff with saddles, to maybe appease some players and make sure that they don't have to kill their favorite pig just to get the saddle back so they can ride a horse after that.
I'm surprised it doesn't already work like armor for a player. Put the elytra on, take the elytra off. Put the saddle on, take the saddle off. I'm surprised it's not already that simple across the board. But that just goes to show how seldom I've put a saddle on an animal and used it in Minecraft. It's been a very long time. I think it was in not even the Citadel server. I think it was in the joint world that I had with Steven and his kids is when the first time I got on a horse, and maybe the only time I got on a horse.
Yeah, I mean, horses are easy enough because they have a UI, and you can put horse armor on that way as well. It does more than one thing. I think the main reason is they don't want to implement a whole pig UI just so you can remove the saddle, but there are more tactile versions of doing that now. We have precedent for that through wolf armor. So I think it's a reasonable expectation from players, I think, to have a means to unsaddle a pig if you're going to saddle a pig at all. I think pigs used to feel more like disposable joke mounts, in the sense that they used to be the achievement tied to riding a pig off a cliff and having it take a certain amount of fall damage but not die. But that's not a thing as of the advancement system taking over from achievements on Java. So yeah, I feel like there's a little bit of that legacy mob behavior stuff that they're trying to retool by reworking saddles in this most recent snapshot that could just go a little bit further to make sure that players don't have to kill their beloved animals. Other thing to talk about in this, just very briefly, because it's going to be big news for someone, but probably a little too technical for you and I, is game tests. From a glance I've taken at these, they seem more suited to people who are working on either resource-intensive data packs that could potentially like mess with code or crash things or whatever, or just modded Minecraft in general. It's obviously not something that you and I, as primarily survival players, are going to be that interested in, but I expect for the right people out there who are looking to use Minecraft as a game engine for their own ideas rather than work within the confines of vanilla Minecraft, it's going to be a really useful tool, and is another step in Mojang making perhaps some of their internal testing process, or at least reproducing their internal processes, making that available for the player base and people who are looking to take Minecraft that extra step. So I think that's a really positive thing for the community as far as Mojang's release of stuff that they use internally.
I agree. And I think that my first thought was towards Minecraft education. So like if you're using Minecraft as a tool to educate kids in school, and you're either teaching them to code, teaching them how to use Minecraft, as you said, as an engine, or if you're developing a Minecraft level or world to then teach the kids something where they're not necessarily learning how to build it, but they're playing in it, then you as the instructor and developer would have access to these testing tools, or kids that are learning to code would also have access to these testing tools, which would be something that they would need to know if they were going to go on and do work in game dev or app development or something in the future. And I think it's all really cool and a step towards the transparency that I see in some other game development tools. I've been looking into this personally on my own, and apps like Godot, Game Maker and stuff, Godot specifically is open source. So having access to that just ends up creating a better product in the long run. It does take some time. So I'll be very curious to see what the feedback would be from people in this community. So if you are part of that community, that is a mod author, a data pack author, or someone that's working in Minecraft education in this space, drop us an email. Let us know what does this change mean to you and your development process, because we'd love to hear about it.
Absolutely, yes. And that's our perfect cue to head into Chunk Mail for this week. In fact, this week is going to be a Chunk Mail dispenser episode where we cover a little bit more listener email. And lately we've had a great trend of people sending us feedback on previous discussion topics. And Joel and I were talking about this before the show, and we would love to get more people's input on topics that we've talked about recently on the show, and maybe use some of the Chunk Mail dispensers as more like a continuation of those discussions. So let that be a prompt for you if you have any opinions about some of the stuff that we've been talking about lately, or as Joel said, if you're interested in the game tests aspect of this latest snapshot, hit us up. The email address is spawnchunkmail@gmail.com. As usual, we will ask everybody to keep your emails short and to the point if you can. It really helps us include them in the show more easily. But Joel is going to kick us off with this first listener email.
First email this week is from Ron D., landscape artist member of our community, making movement fun. Hey, Pix and Joel. In the last episode, you guys talked about the recent changes to movement, and I would like to offer my own insights as to why I think other players do not like the new changes. While it's nicer to move faster, having interesting forms of movement help keep the game engaging, and it's satisfying to pull off. In almost every game, walking and running simply involve holding a key or two and pointing the camera where you want to go. This type of movement is not very stimulating. Elytra jumping, crouch sprinting, and some of the other movement tech removed recently provides a small task for players to do when moving around on the ground. It's almost like a small mini game to do while moving from place to place. Perform the correct actions, and you are rewarded with a small speed boost, or fail and try again. I think that Mojang intends to keep these bugs removed. They should add more interesting ways to move around on foot. For example, a way to get smaller version of the camel's forward jump, or the long requested movement item, a grappling hook. How do you guys think Mojang could make moving around on the ground more fun? Ron D's starved to death after jumping and running around.
that's the downside of all of this running and sprinting, is it does take a toll on the hunger bar, yeah. So I grew up more or less in platformers as a primary like gameplay type. Like those have sort of fallen out of more recent gameplay, probably because of the amount of 3D environmental stuff that players can now have access to. Like the developers have been like changing the environment a lot from the days of the early 2D and 3D platformers that I grew up with. But I remember playing like the Jak and Daxter games, for example, where traversal of your environment, because it was a platformer, was really the primary point of gameplay. Like, it was, can you perform the right set of leaps and jumps to make it across these platforms without falling and, dying or having to try again or whatever. And I think people still take gameplay like that into arenas like Minecraft, even though it's a more of an immersive 3D environment, sandbox kind of physics sim thing. And a lot of the time, people like those games where you can string together a series of movements and it looks athletic, or it gets you there slightly faster, or it executes in a way that you can make a jump that you couldn't otherwise make. And so that sort of run, roll, jump, high jump, fling yourself across the map kind of physics works really well for platformers, and that's the kind of gameplay that people want from a game like Minecraft sometimes when you have such distances to cover. So I can kind of sympathize with that a little bit, because I definitely grew up thinking, if my character can roll, then why the heck would I walk? Because rolling didn't consume extra stamina or anything like that in gameplay, and you always kind of kidded yourself into thinking, oh, if I roll the entire time, then that feels like I'm moving faster, whether you actually were or not, even if it was just like an FOV change that happened to emphasize the fact that the character was rolling, but it made it look like you were going faster. Sort of like how Minecraft players habitually try and sprint in boats because it would change the FOV, even though the boat itself wasn't actually being rowed any faster. So I think a lot of it contributes to that, is like people from older branches of gaming thinking, well, there's definitely got to be a way of moving faster through a series of more complex leaps and jumps that adds skill to gameplay instead of it just being hold down a key to run fast, right?
Yeah, I know what you're saying about the platformers, because I grew up on the same things. Super Mario World, Mega Man. Well, Mega Man is more of a shooter, but like those kind of games where movement was paramount. And I think the huge difference for me here is this is a first-person game. And I've played other first person games like Borderlands and other games that have like jumping up on things and sometimes even double jumps, but like I don't find the first person view to be all that intuitive when you're doing movement augmentation. Rolling in first person would be like vomit inducing, right? Can you imagine what that would actually look like if you were keeping at some point for gameplay purposes, the camera would have to exit the player and you'd have to roll underneath the camera. Otherwise you would just be constantly doing somersaults and seeing the world spin. So that kind of stuff is, I think, difficult to implement in a game like Minecraft. And this is going to be unpopular and probably a little like old man get off my lawn. I think movement on the ground is fine. I think walking is fine. I sprint, like I run places because I do want to, I'm excited to build. I'm excited to get someplace. So I'm gonna run, because why wouldn't you? But like even that's not super fast. And I don't know that walking in Minecraft needs to necessarily be more fun. And I don't know whether that's a product of me being slightly older as a gamer, having more patience than the average person, whether there's just a different gamer mentality with the younger players, that they just want to go, and that standing still is just like, why am I even doing this? Like, this feels like I'm not doing anything. But for me, Minecraft is a building game, and I don't necessarily need to move faster while I'm building, because that makes me miss blocks. I do that now. So being able to move around faster maybe wouldn't be something that I would want all the time. It would be something that I would want to be able to like turn on and off. I think maybe something like a double jump or a sprint level, like an extra sprint level, could be added. Like there's walking, running, and then there's like really running. But we'd run into the same thing that the death message mentioned, which is like the more you do that, the more hungry you're going to get, and you're going to have to stop and eat, because at the moment when you eat, you can't sprint and eat at the same time. Eating just kills the sprint. So I feel like there's going to be some sort of balance, especially in the survival aspect of Minecraft, where if more fun movement was added or more speed was added, then you're going to have to go with the penalties that go along with that, or the restrictions that would go along with that. I think that a lot of players, once it's a certain distance, will just use the Elytra. Now that's provided that you're at endgame and you have one. But yeah. I will famously jump from my wheat field to my shulker boxes, which is 50 blocks away, not even, with the Elytra. Like a single rocket is too much. I have to like blast off, spin around, and try to land softly so I don't overshoot by a country mile. And like that's just me being a little impatient and, wanting to get back and forth as I'm trying to complete something on stream. But like I do that on the regular. I don't necessarily want walking and running to be more fun or more bouncy. And I think some of my pushback on this comes from watching content creators and watching Minecraft videos where somebody is jumping all the time to get that little bit of speed boost. And I find it jarring as a viewer. Like I find the constant up and down really problematic. Satisfactory had this problem as well. It's a much more dramatic jump as well. Like the entire camera moves, and depending on the equipment that you have, you're jumping like 32 meters forward in Satisfactory with this slide jump that they have. And again, the movement speed was like minuscule, but people still did it because it's like, well, I get to move faster. And I purposefully avoid it as best I can. And in terms of something that you could improve, to go into the email question and say like, hey, what could be something that would be applied to movement on the ground? I don't know what could be done to horses to make them more fun, but my thoughts do go to horses and minecarts are the two first things as far as improvement. I think horses already come in as like, well, that's a fun way to not sprint and not walk. Like you can use that to move around differently. But I feel like the spirit of Rondi's email was like still wanting access to being able to build and move around and not have to like dismount and stuff like that. I know we've discussed minecarts in the past. I feel like making the minecarts more viable, reliable over moderate distances, and more customization in the building of minecarts and minecart systems would probably make some movement on the ground more fun in Minecraft. I would certainly have more fun building things. And not that I'm in a state right now with an early game, but if I was in an early game server or early game world, then it would be cool to know that minecarts would be a viable stopping point before getting elytra. Like if you didn't want to rush to beat the dragon, if you wanted to take your time and build out some sort of minecart system, if it was more fun and faster than it currently is, then I think that would be an attraction for players. If you want to really reach for the sky here, or I guess the ground, rollerblades, Minecraft versions of rollerblades. I'm not sure what a medieval themed sword and sorcery version of rollerblades would look like. I guess we sort of had that with like the speed sprint on the boots right now, but like I feel like having something like a rollerblade or a roller skate would be really fun. I think that you could move around quickly. It's something that would have some probably mini game implementations, like what happens when you put them on sand, what happens when you put them on ice. Like I'm thinking like Mario Kart levels where you can create like sand traps and ice skating sections that throw you off the track and put you into trouble. So things like that could be fun. But it could also be like, all right, well, that village is really far away. I don't have elytra yet, but I would imagine that roller skates in Minecraft would be a fairly easy thing to construct, like stone and wood. I would imagine maybe a little bit of redstone, something like that to get you going. And that could be fun because with that, you could probably jump farther, which is something that Rondi suggested with like the camel jump or the move forward, like going along roller skates and coming up into a ravine and being able to jump over it if you're at speed could be kind of cool. In terms of like, again, these are all things that start to lose their luster as soon as you have elytra, but it would be fun, I think. And I think that's the trick. In order for it to be enticing, it would have to be fun, not just like, okay, well, it's faster than running. But once Minecraft players know about elytra and endgame, like they're just going to go for the most efficient. I'm generalizing, I know, but like I feel like that's the kind of behavior that we've come to expect. So in order for someone to say, well, wait a minute, I want to mess around with roller skates or whatever the new movement thing would be, it has to be appealing in some way.
I'm obsessed with the roller skates idea, if only because they would have square wheels. Like, this is Minecraft we're talking about, right? Like,
100%. Yeah.
We can barely identify whether or not minecarts have round wheels because A, they're on tracks, and B, the cart itself is so low to the ground that you can't really see the wheels. But I think it's hysterical to imagine Minecraft roller skates and they're just square wheels, but they still propel you. We are literally reinventing the wheel. One thing that this is kind of a tangent from the notion of making Minecraft's own movement more fun, but one thing I forgot to note in our previous discussion that I think a couple of people pointed out on YouTube, I've seen the discussion happen elsewhere, is that one of the reasons people sprint jump everywhere constantly is because Minecraft terrain is rarely perfectly flat. So players often need to jump to get around natural terrain anyway. And when you knock into a block, if you hit the side of a block before you manage to jump on top of it, it cancels your sprint. And so I think that's part of why is wanting to keep the ideal momentum, or if we're talking about the example we gave last time, which was following somebody else to their base or wherever, like if they're perfectly jumping up the side of this hill, but you're hitting the blocks and you end up not sprinting as a result, and you're having to like pause and jump more deliberately, it means that you lag behind. And that's another way in which traversal doesn't necessarily match up super easily. The solutions being build roads and staircases everywhere, get a horse, or just get used to sprint jumping. So there's a bit of additional ammunition, I think, for the notion of sprint jumping being a way that people are used to getting around. I agree, on a flat surface it seems a little bit ridiculous. It's kind of like you're skipping everywhere. But considering the natural terrain around us, usually in a survival world, is not that heavily modified unless your world's been around for a while, then there's justification for it, I think. As for how Mojang could make moving around on the ground more fun, I struggle to think of ideas like this. This is the kind of thing where I think we have all of the tools that we're going to get as far as movement in this game is concerned. And I'm leaving room for Mojang to surprise us. But I don't think we're getting something like the grappling hook, because then it changes movement vertically as well as horizontally. And I think that kind of stuff feels a little different to just being able to, like, fling yourself a certain distance, like the camel jump, the way that works. So unless they add some kind of like charged jump or some kind of additional boots enchantment, I feel like there's a time when this stuff would just be put onto the enchantment system, which I think is now getting bloated enough that they're reconsidering whether they want to continue adding enchantments or maybe retool that system entirely. But yeah, I think that's really something for the Mojang team to sort out, especially if they're refining out some of these things that parkour players and people who are just interested in getting to a location as fast as possible for speedrunning purposes or whatever, tricks that those folks have come to rely on. I think if they're weeding that stuff out, I'm wondering if they have a solution on the way that they just haven't had time to implement yet. Moving on, though, we have another email from Martin C. with the subject of more sheep variants. Hello, Johnny and Joel. In episode 332, Johnny mentioned that sheep variants would be hard to implement because most of their texture is wool color, and that there aren't that many sheep variants in the real world anyway. While they could be hard to implement, there are sheep variants in the real world which would give the developers a lot to pick from, like with dog breeds. For example, the Tibetan sheep could spawn in mountainous areas. It would have a similar model, but would have fur dripping down like the cold pig variant now. They also have horns and could have potentially goat-like behavior, which would also be educational. The Scottish blackface sheep is also a potential candidate with a black head and black hooves. What do you think? Martin died on a plains biome while herding his sheep.
How did Martin die? That's
the sheep clearly getting up to some mischief, I think. A wolf in sheep's clothing, perhaps.
I feel like there's a Wallace and Gromit joke in here somewhere.
There probably is, yes. But wearing the wrong trousers is probably where it was.
Yeah.
No, I would love sheep with horns. This is one of those things that Instagram throws at me, like where I've just been looking at pictures of like Highland cows and cute animals. There are these black-nosed sheep that I think are native to Switzerland, or at least they are primarily raised in Switzerland, which are adorable. And I think those like have like kind of curly horns and everything, and like I think sheep with horns makes a lot of sense. I worry, considering that one of the examples Martin gave was they could have horns and potentially goat-like behavior. Yes, that'd be educational. In a gameplay perspective, it just means more goats. Effectively, those become either goat variants or they become something that's confusing to the player because it's behaving the same way as a goat, where a lot of mob behavior is meant to be fairly distinct from each other, just because that makes gameplay mechanics feel a little bit more compartmentalized. It doesn't necessarily feel natural so much as it's just, in gameplay behavior terms, you understand what each thing is going to do. And I think while horns are often sometimes incorrectly ascribed as male or female characteristics in farm animals, Minecraft's breeding is supposed to be you breed just two of the same animal together, right? So I worry if players would be misled into thinking they need to breed a quote-unquote male sheep and a female sheep, and so they'd go looking for the sheep that had horns like a ram would, even though like there are female sheep in the real world that can grow horns and you wouldn't necessarily need both of them in order to do proper animal breeding. I just wonder if it would feel like, in terms of the intuitive response a player would have to it, it would overcomplicate mechanics like that were actually remained simple but just not immediately understandable, you know?
Yeah, I hadn't thought about the breeding thing. If it was confusing. Or the other thing too is that if you have a sheep variant that looks that different, then can you even breed a Tibetan sheep in Minecraft with a regular sheep that you see on the plains, right? Like
Yeah.
it just adds a whole layer of complication there. I when I was thinking about this, I was thinking about something you pointed out last week about the pigs, which is like, well, it's cool that there's pig variants, but like, what's the point? Like, what's the gameplay difference? Like, why is there anything in it for the player in terms of gameplay? And I agree with you that horns and goat, I guess, tendencies would be just too goat-like. It's like, well, we already have goats. Goats are almost like a sheep variant in themselves in terms of, yes, they've got a different model, but they have the same sort of vibe in terms of the kind of animal that they are. They have different gameplay aspects, but they strike me kind of like silhouette-wise as like they're similar to sheep. I'm surprised we can't shear the goats, actually. With these kind of sheep variants, I'm wondering if you could do something where a sheep variant, whether it's a Tibetan sheep model or not, could give you more wool. And that would make more sense. If they are a bigger, shaggier sheep, then they would give you more wool. Do all these sheep variants give you the same mutton? Is it the same kind of mutton? Is it the same amount of mutton? Again, if it's a bigger animal, I could see it dropping more mutton. I don't know what the drop rate is on mutton compared to cows dropping steak, but I think you get more steak from a cow than you do mutton from a sheep. That could be just me. Just anecdotal. But I wonder like what kind of things you could do there. And if we do get sheep variants, I do like the idea of a different model. I think that revisiting these old Minecraft models and giving them a new texture variant is not super exciting to me because they all kind of look blocky and dated. And so if you update them and you give them a new model, I think that's one of the reasons why people like frogs and goats, is because the goats are a new, more modern looking mob, and they have new mechanics and they look different. And so if you update the sheep, I think that, adding horns is fun. I think that would add a lot to it. I like the idea of a bigger, shaggier sheep. But I think one of the other things that you could do is change the scale, change the model, change the animation. You think about a sniffer and how a sniffer feels as it lumbers around and moves side to side. If there was a sheep that moved like that, and that was like somewhere in between, I mean, a sniffer is ginormous. So somewhere in between a regular sheep now and a sniffer, you could have this giant sheep. And like, I feel like intuitively a player would look at that and go like, this experience is going to be different than the sheep that I've already encountered. So how is that different? I mean, that's up to Mojang, I think. As far as like the blackface Scottish sheep, I didn't know of those from, I think, maybe TikTok or something. But I don't know what you could do with them to make them more interesting than the sheep that we already have. And just coloring the sheep we already have black would not really be all that appealing. So do you make them smaller? Do you make them cuter? Maybe they're a companion animal, like they'll follow you around, like give a little bit of RP gameplay in there. It doesn't necessarily have to be something that you need to have a drop from or need to help the player with construction materials. But I feel like if you had some sort of flavor as to like why you would want to have a different kind of sheep around, to communicate to players that it's different and it has a different value and a different use. And I think that's where any kind of variant has to get thought through. And I don't really feel like the pig variants have really a lot to offer. I'm kind of indifferent on them. It's like, it's cool to have them, I guess. I'm not going to say new things in the game are bad, but I'm not excited about them because there's nothing new to do with them.
You know the workplace saying of like when you have a meeting that feels kind of pointless, this could have been an email. I feel like a lot of these kind of changes are this could have been a resource pack. You know what I mean? Like it feels a little bit like, yes, it's great that we're getting stuff in the base game that people can play out of the box with Minecraft, but so often some of these changes just come across, if they don't modify anything fundamental about gameplay, then they just come across as something that you could have done with a resource pack that adds more variety to that specific mob. The same way people get like zombies that look a little bit different and there's some variety within that, right? I think that's the problem with it. And I think the solution is to spend a little bit more time with each of these animals, figure out what behaviors they can have that helps them feel more unique. And if you want to diversify from there, then great. But yeah, I think, again, like just coloring the sheep's face slightly differently could just be a resource pack, and you even have resource packs that allow you to work that level of variety in with existing Minecraft stuff, so that you wouldn't have to completely transform all sheep. It could just be a few of them. Even that, I feel like, is something that feels kind of trivial, I guess. So I'm hoping if Mojang has plans for it, they have long-term plans to make things a little bit more diverse gameplay-wise as well as just visually.
Last email comes from Anima, the new maple biome. Hello, Johnny and Joel. I was talking with my boyfriend about getting colored leaves in Minecraft, and he helped me solidify it enough to email about it. My idea is a maple biome that has different trees, and each tree would have a solid leaf color with a different chance of generating. For example, red, 30% chance, orange, 30%, yellow, 30%, and brown, 10%. These would all generate at different levels. This next part doesn't make sense with reality, but what if the maple biome could finally give us a greenish wood that people had hoped for with jungle wood or azalea wood? What are your thoughts on this autumn biome? Anima walked off into the maple biome, admiring the new leaf colors.
Well, as somebody who lives under the maple leaf flag, Joel, what are your thoughts on maple leaves being added into Minecraft?
I think, well, there's two things. I think it's fun to think about that kind of stuff and have colored leaves in game. I've played a mod pack that had different biomes that had like colored leaves, and it felt like home. Like it felt like the part of the world that I live in. My backyard turns bright yellow in the fall. It's very, very pretty. And it does have a fun sense of immersion in the game. I do find it funny though that immediately after we get a new wood type, a new leaf type, and a host of other sub blocks within that wood type, that there's an email about like, well, could we have other wood types and other leaf colors? And I think that's like, people like color. They want more variety of color in the game. And while I really like the new pale oak palette, to some people it's black and white, and they're like, that's not super exciting. So you go to look for color. I like the idea of a biome that basically, it's kind of back and forth. It's like, yes, okay, fall exists in the world, in the real world, but it's a season. It doesn't happen all the time. And this biome feels like it could be like a magical biome, like where it's just fall all the time. These particular trees and leaves have these colors. I don't know if the trick there is to then add a new wood type, because I think, like, do you have to add a new wood type for every color of leaf? Or does the player go in there knowing they're basically just going to run into oak trees? And then each oak tree that's going to give you the normal wood. It's kind of like azalea trees give you oak wood. And then you're going to get different leaf colors. So the leaf color is the real thing that's in the biome. And then you could take those and put them in other biomes that, I guess those would have to be leaves that don't adjust their color based on the biome. So like azalea, like spruce leaves, or spruce needles, as we discussed last week. Those would stay the same. I think that would be great. I mean, you think about all the different things that you could use in like gardens, and like, instead of just being a fall leaf color, you could have like a brightly colored bush that looks like it's flowering because it's bright red. Stuff like that could be really, really fun to mess around with. I don't know. I mean, I feel like the weight of the colors could be maybe based on like how close that maple biome is to a desert. Like, are you going to get more reds and oranges if it's closer to a hot biome? Are you going to get more yellows and browns if it's closer to like a winter biome? Because in fall, the closer to winter you get, the more brown everything is, right? And when you combine this idea of a maple biome with leaf litter, I think it would be really, really cool, because of course that's what the leaves look like on the ground in fall. And right now it looks kind of odd with a lot of leaf litter on the floor of a forest that's perfectly lush and alive. And I kind of wonder whether a maple biome could be a good spot to have leaf litter. And some of the concept art we saw about birch forests, where they had like downed logs that were sideways on the ground, great spot for that too. Like, I think there could be some really fun things that you could add beyond just colored leaves in a maple biome. I just don't know if that's on the docket for Mojang. I'd love to see it though. I think it would be really, really cool to add the leaf colors without adding like 3 or 4 different wood palettes for the game, because that would just get, I think, cumbersome. Like, there's a lot in it now, and I think that the real gem of the email is the idea of an autumn or a maple biome with weighted leaf color depending on where it's located.
Yeah, definitely. Like these sound like the maple trees I see in modded biomes, and those biomes I think are often the most exciting and vanilla feeling addition to biome mods. Like a lot of the other ones get into more fantastical territory, or they are reworks of existing forest types. Like they'll have a different type of spruce forest that looks more like redwoods, where the trees are even taller, that kind of thing. And I think whenever you see maple biomes, I tend to gravitate towards red leaves whenever I play modded anyway. When I was doing the spooky mansion, the necro mansion on fantasy Minecraft, I was decorating that with a lot of red foliage because it's something I don't get a chance to play around with in vanilla, and it still feels natural and feels at home with what my idea of what Minecraft gameplay is. So I think that's a smart choice, and I think it seems like a logical next step considering what they've been doing with the wood types in this game. Cherry leaves gave us the first non-green leaf type. Pale oak has followed suit with something that's white wherever you take it in the world. And so I can imagine them implementing some sort of autumnal biome as long as it made sense for the geography of Minecraft and for the sort of natural world that Minecraft represents. I can see it mixing in with taiga biomes in a really interesting way. And I think there's room for it in the game. I think it just depends on how many additional things it adds. A new wood type on its own, a single wood type, I think is great. I think more than one wood type feels like a lot. And so like you, I think it's cool that it would have different types of leaves for the same type of wood. In a way, we have precedent for that already because we have azalea having the same type of wood as oak, although people are still calling for there to be an actual azalea wood added at some point. But I think the difference here is leaf management becomes a thing. You know, if you go here and shear a few trees, you end up with a lot of different leaf types for your inventory. We have more tools now to manage a variety of blocks coming from the same thing. Like if you want to bundle half a stack of each type of leaf, then that's not going to take up as much space as it would have previously. But I think around any new addition that adds a lot of new blocks, Mojang has that background concern of inventory management and not being able to address players' concerns about adding blocks to the game long term. So I'm curious about that aspect of it, and maybe that's why Mojang has been reticent to add something like this in the past. But I agree. I think autumnal leaves would really add something Minecraft feels like it's been missing. You can kind of interpret most biomes as being spring or summer. We interpret cold biomes like snowy taigas and snow plains as being something more wintry. The same can go for mountains and windswept hills and stuff in some places with the grass color and everything. But I think we don't have an autumnal biome, and that could complete a set of in-game seasons without them necessarily having to add seasons as a gameplay mechanic and then have people sweeping leaves and shoveling snow when they just want to be building something in a normal forest biome. I also want to circle back to something you said about leaf litter, and I think it's the perfect distillation of why some people have the problem with leaf litter is because you don't see the leaves turning on the trees that are supposedly dropping them. And I think that's a really important point to make, is that if we had leaf litter as something a bit closer to glow lichen, where it could be applied to the underside and side textures of leaf blocks, then maybe it would feel more realistic that there's all this leaf litter on the floor, instead of having to, I don't know, single out individual bits of the leaf texture to have some that were turning brown and some that weren't, which feels like it would just fundamentally change the way people use leaves right now. But I'm kind of curious if a lot of people are seeing that as the disconnect between leaf litter being all these brown leaves on the ground and the leaves above all being perfectly uniformly green. I think that might be one of the things that's putting people off leaf litter as an idea right now, and is something that we'd have to get past. I'm wondering if there are ways to soften that by introducing new places that leaf litter could be found. But I agree leaf litter would make a perfect addition to a maple biome if they had the time to develop that for an upcoming update, and I think it could really fill a gap in what people see as the logical next steps in the natural world for Minecraft.
I like the idea of the world we're in Minecraft right now having 3 of the 4 seasons as a perception, like just depending on where you're building. One of the things I was thinking about is this maple biome. Like, what if to just add a little bit of a twist to the gameplay of it, instead of just going there and always getting 4 different leaf colors depending on the size of the biome, what if it was seasonal? Like, what if you had to go there to get your yellow leaves at a certain time? You had to go there to get your orange leaves at a certain time, and they would just kind of like rotate through the colors. I don't know what that would look like in terms of like game mechanics and timing and how that looks like behind the scenes. But rather than just kind of going to get what you want immediately, I wonder if it would add a chance to like have the, plant a tree in your tree farm, and then depending on where it is in its growth stage, similar to how copper ages, like if you can shear it right away, you'll get yellow. If you have some patience, you'll get orange. If you really want to wait for the red, then you can get those eventually. And if you have a couple different trees, then like you can have them at different stages constantly. So you'll always have a supply of each color if you brought them home to your home base. So there's some fun aspects of gameplay that could be unique to that. And Minecraft already has kind of that magic vibe. So I don't think having a seasonal biome or a seasonal tree on its own without the rest of the world really rotating through that would be completely out of the question.
I wonder if it's something that you could implement differently to how copper ages as well. Like if you're talking about stuff aging, it would happen more on like an amount of day-night cycles that had passed rather than it being random tick-based, because I feel like having just a jumble of different colors attached to a single tree wouldn't make as much sense as the entire tree aging, and a lot of the leaves kind of, they maybe have a little bit of a gradient of color, but you don't have like red leaves and yellow leaves all kind of zigzagged in between, I don't think it would necessarily work that way. So it might end up having to be a whole new aging mechanic if they wanted to go that route. And you'd have to have a way of freezing them in place once they were positioned somewhere else by a player. So yeah, there's a lot to think about there, but I think it's a logical thing for Minecraft, and I hope it's something we see in future. It'll take 10 years for it to be implemented in the same way that people were waiting for natural cherry trees in Minecraft for so long, but we've got the time to wait, I think. For now, we're going to wait a little bit longer because that's going to wrap up our next episode of The Spawn Chunks. You can find some information about the show and links to some of the stuff that we've talked about today over at thespawnchunks.com. The music for the show is composed by me, and The Spawn Chunks is proud as ever to be a listener-supported podcast. If you get some value out of the show, why not consider putting some value back in? You can visit patreon.com/thespawnchunks to join our community. Pledging at any level gets you an invite to our patrons-only Discord chat. You can watch and listen to the show live when we record it every Monday in Discord. You can also join our monthly Minecraft Hangout and our quarterly Hangout, both of which are coming up in the next couple of weeks. So if you hop on board now, you got a chance to get a peek behind the scenes and also share what you've been up to in Minecraft over the last month or so. We currently have 304 patrons, which is down 1 from last week. There is always room for more. Special thanks go out to our content engineer patrons, Hunter555, Jumbo Sale, Mindtrip Media, Party Voyager, and Yitz. Thank you all for your support on this episode.
Sharing the podcast with your friends is the easiest way to support the show. Just tell a friend about the Spawn Chunks and where they can go to listen to it. You can find us at the Spawn Chunks on all the social media that matters. You can find new episodes on Mondays on all of your favorite podcasting apps, as well as the video version on YouTube. You can email the show at spawnchunkmail@gmail.com. The RSS feed is linked on our website, and the patron-only RSS feed is on the Patreon page. That's where you can listen to the render distance, the extended version of the podcast.
My name is Johnny, but online I go by Pixelriffs. You can find most of what I do at youtube.com/Pixelriffs, where the Minecraft Survival Guide is currently in its 3rd season. I also stream 3 days a week on Twitch, where I do behind-the-scenes work for my YouTube stuff and play a little Elden Ring on the side. I'm also the voice of the unofficial Hermitcraft recap, which you can find through a quick YouTube search. And aside from that, I'm at Pixelriffs on both Blue Sky and Instagram. Joel, where can people find you online?
Links to everything that I'm doing online can be found at joelduggan.com. That includes the Citadel Cafe, which is my favorite podcast about sci-fi and fantasy entertainment. I'm a little biased, but it's a lot of fun. Talked about the Super Mario Bros. 3 documentary last week, as well as Nine Souls, an indie game that I'm playing right now. You can also find me on social media at Joel Duggan and Joel Duggan on Twitch, where I stream Tuesday through Saturdays at 1 o'clock Atlantic. Right now in rotation, Minecraft, of course, also Stardew Valley, my first playthrough, as well as Satisfactory.
Thanks for visiting the Spawn Chunks. The world outside is infinite, so test the game.